Chapter 6. Learning to Hunt. 3 caribou were walking down a game trail from Whistler Basin. They were cows whose very young calves were lying hidden near timberline waiting for their mothers to come back to them. The caribou met the 2 wolves coming up the trail. Instantly they wheeled and trotted quickly away. A cow moose caught the alarm and started for the thick forest. But in the trail was one who did not turn aside. A bear, the biggest old male grizzly in the Athabasca region, was on his way to a dense grove where man could not approach him during his day rest without making enough noise to wake him up. He was only recently come from his long winter sleep in a den under one of the higher cliffs. His dark brown fur, tipped with yellowish gray about the shoulders and back, rippled in waves over his great muscles as he walked. He was old and wise and cautious, but for wolves he did not even change his pace. Trappers and rangers who caught glimpses of his massive form at a distance called him the haystack grizzly, for he looked like a haystack moving among the rocks and the tree trunks. Shrewdly, the old bear watched the 2 wolves. He noted the mother's hard breathing, the strained, furtive look she threw over her shoulder. He saw, too, how nearly exhausted the woolly black pup seemed as he gamely strove to keep up with her. As the wolves passed him, at a respectful distance from his trail, he stopped for a long breath of the mountain air. Every taint in it was analyzed during that cautious sniff. Then the haystack grizzly turned off at right angles and went striding up the ridge in the fast bear walk that eats up the miles without seeming ever to tire the animal. Blackie was heading now for a pass which would take her out of Whistler Basin into a neighboring one that led down to heavy timber on the sunny side of Flathead Mountain. She and Old Gray had always liked the high peak and basin country at or above timberline instead of the lower forest areas where wolves ordinarily roamed. She did not stop to see whether the pup was tired out or weakening. Her nervous trot carried her on, and the black pup struggled and gasped and bumped himself over the rocks, somehow always close behind no matter where she led. Suddenly, Blackie stopped and crouched. The pup almost bumped into her hind legs and then threw himself down on his belly to make the best of the opportunity to rest. Ahead, a line of brownish-gray animals with massive curved horns was threading its way across the wolf's path. The mountain sheep were seeking the highest plateau for the day. Occasionally, their hoofs dislodged stones which rolled clattering down the mountain, but they kept on without a turn of the head. The leader was one to be remembered. Darker than the rest, he had horns thicker and heavier, but badly battered at the points. 14 years of experience had left him the undisputed guide of the finest band to be found south of the Smoky. Grandly they moved past and became mere specks among the cliffs. Ordinarily, Blackie would not have stopped for sheep. They would run from her. But she did not wish to alarm them and thus perhaps call attention to herself. While with the pup on this fateful day, she felt like obliterating herself from all notice. With a lick or 2 at her bleeding toe and a thorough licking of the pup, she ended the rest and led quickly to a den in the low-growth spruce just above the edge of some rather dense thickets. This was where she had safely raised a litter during the previous spring. The place was cool and musty. Inside, she lay down for a moment with the youngster, then came out to mount guard at a convenient thicket. A marmot's shrill whistle annoyed her. She moved nearer to his burrow and then lay down. When the whistler stood on his hind legs to look for her, she did not stir. He decided that she had gone away. Presently, he felt it safe to go a few yards toward the grass patches. When he was least expecting it, a black streak shot down upon him and carried him off in jaws hard as a vice. The pup walked to a feast. It was this Whistler that started Blackie's pup on many weeks of stalking for these elusive dwellers of the Basin country. One taste seemed to whet his appetite. The Whistlers stayed in their safe burrows during the night, but were always up early in the morning, for the long winter sleep had left them thin and very hungry. Blackie took little interest in hunting them. The big ones only weighed between 15 and 20 pounds and were tough. She preferred hunting fawns. But to the black pup, the whistling marmots meant real sport, and while Blackie stayed in or near the new den, he regularly hunted them, learning to sneak on his stomach, to lie hid when they raised their heads, to rush in pursuit, and to fight the savage old warriors when they were cornered and on the defensive. It was excellent practice because it made the pup work for himself instead of simply following his mother to share in her kills. This he did too, but the Whistler hunting was all his own. And because life moved so easily and happily here, Blackie stayed near the den much longer than ordinarily would have been the case. It did not take a long time for the marmots to become educated. The older ones stayed nearer to their burrows than usual and kept a better watch. One of them was sure to see the approaching wolf and to spread the alarm by a shrill whistle. Others then whistled also until the warning had gone the whole length of the basin and back. Every one of them then quickly scuttled for his burrow and squatted there ready to dive in. When the pup came too close to any burrow, into it the marmot would go. He would not so much as stick out his round nose again until the signals of his relatives showed that the enemy had moved on. In vain the pup made stalks, tried ambushes, and played the trick of seeming to be interested in only other things. The marmots had learned how to outwit him and were thoroughly enjoying it. One old black fellow with a straw-colored head, whose burrow was nearest to the woods, always fluttered his lips at him with an insulting hissing sound which exasperated the pup much more than all the whistling the others could do. Therefore, every visit to the marmot colony began with a stalk to catch old Bald-Face. Sometimes the wily one would wait so long that he could kick dirt into the pup's eye as he made his plunge to safety. Then the young wolf would dig and tear up stones around the burrow, growl at his safe enemy, and try again and again to somehow push in after him. The more he worked and panted, the more insulting grew old Bald-Face. The pup finally began to haunt that particular spot, but old Bald-Face was too fat to care if he occasionally missed his meal of grass and weeds. Often he just rolled up in his bed at the end of the burrow and went to sleep. Finally, Blackie grew interested. Instead of descending among them after daylight when all were out feeding, she came to Baldy's burrow while it was still in darkness and the marmots asleep. Crouching behind a rock with ears flattened and only a nose and 2 eyes showing, she waited. Presently the sky grew white. The mist slowly rolled away, and out popped the head and neck of Baldy. Long he looked around for danger. The nose of the wolf, peeping from behind the rock, was well hidden among the green weeds and blue harebells. Baldy showed his powerful black shoulders, then his middle, finally his whole 20-pound body. Nothing stirred around him. He could not even see an eagle in the sky, so he waddled 2 steps toward his favorite pasture. Something warned him of danger, and he jumped back to the burrow, but no enemy appeared, so he felt reassured and started out again. Too late, he heard the stones fly as the old wolf made a dash. 6 feet away from home, he only had time for 2 jumps when Blackie caught and bore him off. In the rear excitedly ran the pup to share in the final rites. After that, no whistler was safe. When the black pup was more than 3 months old and August had melted almost all of the snow, Blackie moved to Whistler Creek Valley in order to be nearer the caribou, which spent the hot days upon the remaining snowbanks in its upper reaches. She knew caribou to be good eating as well as comparatively easy game. Later, their antlers would be hard and dangerous, both sexes having them instead of only the males, as in the case of the deer and the moose. Now, however, they had nothing except their hoofs for defense. The caribou calves were Blackie's particular prey. They had speed and could climb almost as well as their mothers, but they could sometimes be separated from the old ones and then did not know where to go to escape. Blackie, without the assistance of her mate, found it no easy matter to make kills regularly for food. That she had stopped eating porcupines, for growing up under her guidance was one who showed himself more crafty than either of his parents, and an expert hunter by nature. Where Blackie usually strove first to catch the hind leg, hamstring, and then cripple even the larger fawns and calves, the black pup always looked for the throat hold, a sudden killing grip that ended the battle almost at once. Though lanky and awkward at his age, he had by necessity already become a veritable demon in a scrimmage. The nightly hunting soon took the pair further and further afield. They ranged far up and down the Smoky and its tributaries. They made forays into Jasper National Park on the south and across the ridges to the Athabasca. Blackie's restless energy came again, and it kept her on the move. The pup's muscles, developed by steady work, could carry him anywhere she led, and she made the most of this. Blackie would have nothing to do with the other wolves. The pup took his cue from her and avoided them too. Coyotes, much smaller than the big wolves, but like them in the other ways, bothered the pair a great deal. Coyotes, much smaller than the big wolves, but like them in other ways, bothered the pair a great deal. Without the support of Old Gray, Blackie could not cope with the coyotes. They followed her about and took advantage of her kills. She could keep them at arm's length while she fed, but could not cow them into respectful submission or fear. They worried her. The pup learned to hate coyotes. They growled and snapped at him. They treated him like the dirt under their feet, well knowing that he was not old enough to punish them. They even ruined his favorite whistler hunting, for in this he worked without his mother and was at their mercy. The old ones traveled in pairs, usually accompanied by their litter of the year. There was one old coyote, a lone male, who for weeks spent much of his time sitting on the edge of the ridge above Whistler Basin, watching the wolf pup hunt whistlers. No sooner would one be caught, when down the ridge the coyote would come up on the run and take the prize for himself. He never failed, just for good measure, to give the pup a nip if he could catch him. When the wolf pair began roaming, they escaped this home-loving old coyote. It was not until they returned in September to feast on the game carcasses left by hunters that they again encountered him. By that time he had adopted a mate, a mangy little coyote from the valley of the Smoky. This one was lazy and embittered against the world. Her mate of the spring had been shot. Her litter of 4 had died for lack of proper attention. Carcasses were now lying about on all sides, but these still too delighted in following the returned wolves. Blackie contented herself with growls and a show of teeth whenever too closely pressed, but rage was gathering in the heart of the black pup. He had stalked and finally caught one of his favorite whistlers early one morning in a remote basin where hunters did not penetrate. Out from the dwarf spruce loped the 2 coyotes.